Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Tim Davey. I teach at All Nations Christian College in the UK. Now, one of my areas of research is children at risk in the Bible and in the contemporary world. And in this series of videos, we're going to look systematically at the texts of the Old Testament that feature the word orphan, or you might have fatherless in your Bible. And before we dive into those passages, in this first video, I want to cover some introductory questions to help set up the series. So first, why study orphan language in the Old Testament? Well, I'm imagining that if you're watching this, you'll be either a student, lecturer, researcher interested in the topic, or perhaps you're working in ministry with and on behalf of children at risk. And of course, you might operate in both spheres or neither. Well, studying orphan language in the Old Testament is an important area of academic work because, as we'll see, children, and particularly children in vulnerable situations, play an important and varied role in the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, there's an increasing amount being done on children in the Bible and child attentive readings, and so exploring how these children feature in biblical texts is a further way of understanding the Bible better. And if you're someone who works with or on behalf of vulnerable children or children at risk and are wanting to dig deeper roots for your ministry, I'm so glad you're here as well. My aim with the videos is to make them academically robust while at the same time being accessible and thought-provoking. And I hope you'll grow in your understanding of how these texts connects with ministry, but in a way that wisely discerns the complexities of moving from ancient texts to the contemporary world. And one of the things we'll see is the sheer variety of ways in which these children feature in the Old Testament. Some of these may be familiar, some may be surprising and even uncomfortable, but we'll navigate these texts together over the series. Okay, so a second introductory issue is on language. I don't know what the word orphan means in your context. In the UK, it feels, well, kind of outdated. It makes us think of a child who's lost both parents. It's worth noting in contemporary context, typically orphan can refer to a child who's either lost one parent or both parents. And you might find in your Bible version that the word orphan has been replaced by something like fatherless. Now, the Hebrew term we're focusing on in this series is yatom. And in this series, I might refer to orphan or fatherless, or even just the Hebrew term yatom. Now, the yatom could have lost both parents, but it tends to refer more strictly to the fatherless. So this child's father may be alive, but is either unable or unwilling to offer them protection. And whether alive or dead, it is the absence of a father that is the defining element of the yatom's status. In that culture, the father would have been the focal point of economic provision, of legal representation, and social and religious inclusion. So if he wasn't there to fulfill these roles, this left the child and their widowed mother vulnerable to exploitation. So we should bear these things in mind as we approach the biblical text. And of course, we'll unpack this a lot more as we go. So the third question is why just look at the yatom texts? There are plenty of other texts in the Old Testament that feature children in general or children in situations of risk. But honestly, there are just so many of them. And I'll be making videos on other passages at other times. But for this series, I want to focus on the 42 uses of yatom by the biblical writers and build up a picture of this particular category of young people. Now, in the slide, you'll see a word cloud representing the distribution and frequency of yatom texts, so that the bigger the biblical book name, the more frequently the term yatom appears in it. And as you can see, the text mentioning the yatom can be found in a variety of books, but perhaps the first thing to note is the clustering of its use. So especially in Deuteronomy, so 11 times, Psalms 8 times, Job 7 times, and to a lesser extent, Isaiah and Jeremiah, both with 4 times. And I think also notable is the absence of yatom in historical narratives of Joshua to Kings, as well as Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Chronicles. Now, of course, there are vulnerable children in those books, but they aren't referred to as yatom there. And my view is that yatom is used as a category rather than for specific fatherless or orphaned children. And as we'll see, it's a category or group that functions particularly well within legal texts. So, for example, in commands or potential condemnations, and powerful poetic rhetoric. In the historical narratives, however, we see many examples of vulnerable children, but they are particular, albeit often unnamed, people rather than groups. So using the general category of yatom wouldn't work so well in those contexts. Well, in any case, this gives you a sense of the kind of texts that we'll be exploring in this series. And then finally, my approach with each video will be to choose one verse or passage that features the yatom, give some context to what's happening before and after it, and explore what role the yatom plays in that text. And depending on the text, we'll dig into issues of interpretation and application as well. I'm not aiming to be exhaustive, but I do want to gradually build up a picture of the ways that yatom features across the Hebrew Bible. So I hope you find the journey interesting and useful, whether that's to nourish you in your ministry or to further your academic work. But most of all, I hope you capture something of God's heart for children, and especially those who find themselves in difficult circumstances. See you next time.